Hi, I'm Anastasia, a research assistant at McMaster University and a collaborator on this project. This is the third of 5 deliverables presented in what we call the Knowledge Series. This webinar is on the topic of synthesizing what we have heard from a representative sample of Canadian transit agencies about the state of zero-emission transit adoption. We also make some key remarks on these findings. So I'd like to thank all the transit providers which have participated in the project so far, and feel free to share this webinar and other materials widely with others who may be interested. So again, it's all about zero emission Canadian transit and the interviews that we had and discussions that we had with many of you. Before I begin the content of the presentation, I just like to acknowledge that this Zero Emission Bus Knowledge Series is supported by the Canadian Resources Canada Zero Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative project, and the opinions expressed are those of the authors. They do not represent the views of the funding agency, and the aim of this project is to spread awareness within the transit community about zero emission vehicles through a set of knowledge series presentations, webinars like this, and reports. This is the overview for this webinar here. I'll just be talking about which transit agent, how we went about interviewing transit providers, how we went about collecting the data, the main themes that were extracted from these interviews, and the key messages we would like to convey. So we spoke with you about low carbon technologies. I say low carbon here because while the aim was zero emission technologies, some of you have also talked about different low carbon technologies for a variety of reasons. So we kept the questions open and we solicited interview requests from 50 agencies on the topic of these low carbon technologies and zero emission as part of these low carbon transit technologies. So we solicited these interviews, and we did the interviews between the months of March and May of this year, 2022. The interviews were conducted with transit managers, directors, and fleet supervisors, essentially anybody who is in charge with the overseeing the transition to this different low carbon greenhouse gas reducing technology relative to the conventional technology. Ultimately, we interviewed 19 agencies, and they represented a large, medium, and small size of organization. And this representation captured more than 75% of transit ridership in Canada, our select sample. So these are the 4 types of questions we asked the transit providers. The first was about their attitudes towards the technologies. So again, low carbon technologies can include all the zero emission technologies, which is electric and hydrogen. That's zero emissions at the tailpipe, but also including other low carbon technologies relative to diesel. So that could be natural gas, either compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas. There are some discussions on that, and also hybrid buses were kind of captured aloud if the agency felt like it was pertinent to talk about that in their story. They talked about that. We also asked about their access to knowledge resources and awareness, like how do they know what they know about zero emission technologies and low carbon technologies. We asked about what is enabling and preventing them in adopting zero emission technology specifically. So if they were considering low carbon technologies, what was stopping them from considering the zero emission technology? And if they were pursuing the zero emission technologies, what again were enabling them and preventing them? And then we asked them about their decision-making processes. So policies that they have that they've been using, their processes involved in that, and their research along the way. So how did they make their decisions? As mentioned, the data collection looked like asking 19 Canadian transit agencies. Interviews were on average an hour long, and there was over 250,000 words from the transcripts. There was 3 main themes that we were able to distill from these interviews, and we have some remarks from the themes. So the themes, so what we heard from the agencies we interviewed, boiled down to these 3 main themes. The first was uncertain technology. So that is the zero emission technology. It's uncertain. There's a lot of unknowns still associated with it, but it's paired with ambitious policy. So policy from council, policy from funding grants, from policies from just internal an internal motivation to reach a certain sustainability or to have a certain amount of sustainability. So this ambitiousness was always paired with just the uncertainty of the technology itself. We also found a theme that acknowledged the internal knowledge gaps within agencies, what's missing and what they know and what they need to know more about, and what resources they are missing to answer those questions. And then we identified through listening to these interviews the missing links to move forward. So what was maybe suggested by the transit agencies on ways to move forward, to again speed up and to facilitate not speed up, but to facilitate the safe and the safe transition to zero emission technologies, buses in particular. So the first theme here is uncertain technology and ambitious policy. So again, those 2 things paired together. Ultimately, ready or not, they are coming. The zero emission buses are coming. That is the sentiment that was kind of carried across in many agencies. The first sub-theme on that idea is it feels like a forced learning experience. So many agencies kind of had this sentiment. There was some frustration that zero emission buses are an emerging technology, and there's so many uncertainties associated with that. But in their expectations that they're receiving from directives, they're sort of treating this like it's a solved technology, like it's similar to diesel buses. Just buy the bus and put it on the road, like it's just buy it and it will just run. But there's a frustration when these transit agencies that we spoke to are saying that it's not just that simple, and there's a sentiment, yes, that they're treating it like it's a solved technology, when there's still uncertainties and a lot that needs to be put in place before they can run as expected. And again, that all is leading them to feeling like it's a forced learning experience. There's uncertainty in fulfilling council mandates. So in some agencies where there is a council that is mandating a certain shift, either a percentage change in electric buses or a percent greenhouse gas reduction, there's just uncertainty in if they can even achieve that. And then as a byproduct, there's also a fear of failing. If they, as we heard again and again, this was a forced learning experience. It's also a very expensive learning experience, as zero emission buses, like electric buses in particular, have a high upfront cost. So there's a fear of failure. If you purchase a lot of nice buses, we heard it echoed again and again. You don't want to end up running out of energy, running out of charge mid-route, and then having to pull the bus back to get charged back at the depot, and have that be a headline story for the town. There's just a fear of failure in this technology, and a fear of just failing, leaving a negative impression of transit for the community. That was coupled with this technology not working and the investment not working. So, and this is again is due to the uncertainty of the technology that a lot of agencies feel because they just don't know enough. and they're still learning. So there's also this feeling that that the transition is rushed and it doesn't feel very gradual. And this is supported by, again, the ambitious policy as mentioned. Either the council demands, if the council is demanding anything. There are some agencies that don't hear anything from council, too expensive to even consider, so they aren't even thinking about zero emission technologies. But those that are, there's a concern that the transition is not gradual because there's this ambitious push, and then also there's currently available funding mechanisms feel rushed, as in apply now because you don't know when that money will disappear, and once you apply now you can just figure it out once you receive the money, and that leaves a forced learning experience feeling for some, for quite a few of the agencies. So again, these are the agencies that feel kind of cornered into it and are being forced to learn because of external pressures. As mentioned, some agencies don't have this forced learning experience because the agency are the upfront costs of zero emission buses are prohibitive, and council won't even entertain the idea, and so they aren't really looking to invest in electrifying at this point. So those are some of the smaller agencies we talked to. They say that. So the experiences are varying, but we did find many medium and some smaller agencies are looking into it that do feel like it's a forced learning experience. So another sub-theme here is it is a new way of doing business. So zero emission buses, they are different in so many ways than diesel buses. And there are internal reasons that make it more difficult to adopt. So for instance, some agencies share that it's difficult to find the funding for the capital. Again, cost is a huge barrier. The upfront cost of of an electric bus is a huge barrier. And so they would like to fund their bus through savings in operations that will happen in the future. However, internally, as the way the organization is structured, there's very rigid divides between operating capital budgets. But if you see operation savings down the line, you should be able to funnel that back into capital savings. The way the organization is currently structured, it makes it difficult to transfer funds. So this is just one of many ways that make it more difficult to operationalize this technology, in addition to many other barriers or many other parameters that can be considered for zero emission buses. For instance, there's things like the state of charge and most optimal route or time of day or charging specifications that come along with electric buses that don't come along with diesel buses. So these are different things that need to be considered. They're completely different than diesel buses that are also coming into play and shaping the way that agencies must restructure to be able to accommodate zero emission buses. Again, playing into it, this still being an emerging technology, and it's a completely new way for them to do business. Another thing we heard was the expectations of council can be out of touch sometimes. So as mentioned, sometimes we don't hear anything at all from council, and they don't comment on transit's responsibility for emissions, or they hear too much from council and too prescriptive mandate being a prescriptive mandate being stated when they don't know the steps yet, when the staff themselves don't know the steps yet to get to that goal. So those expectations can be a bit out of touch, and especially in recognizing that this is a all new way of business that must be restructured. Also, zero emission buses require in-house expertise. However, that is missing. So we heard that again and again, that the staff that they currently have, if they're a small agency, they have one person responsible for transit, as well as parking, as well as engineering infrastructure, and they just do all of that. And their transit looks like a few routes in one bus. So they don't have the time to look into zero emission. They are too busy wearing different hats. Medium-sized agencies, they maybe have one person dedicated to transit as a whole. So how does that one person also now find the time to research a new and emerging technology? So it's difficult in terms of time. They feel constrained for time. In larger agencies, there's more capacity and they have more in-house expertise that can be trained, but still seeking the expertise and hiring is difficult, again, because it's a whole new way of doing business. So finding that trained staff is difficult. So the final sub-theme here for this theme here in the green is that all of these uncertainties are piling up and stacking. So agencies are left feeling kind of constrained, and they have to reshift whatever priorities they had, be it service improvements, frequency improvements, things going into that. They feel now, because their day is even more divvied up into looking into zero emission buses, their priorities may have to be reshifted to support zero emission buses. We've heard that it seems like it's all that anybody's ever talking about is zero emission buses. And so they're feeling kind of constrained into this being their top priority. And that might not necessarily be good or bad, it just is occurring. But it is really crystallizing the uncertainties associated with the technology and how they have to overcome and learn more about it. So there's also an unknown uncertainty associated with current energy supply, backup energy supply, and future energy supply. So in terms of electric buses, it's electric, and they have electricity requirements, and there are uncertainties just associated with how many buses can be online, how many more buses in the future can be online in terms of energy supply sufficiency, how much backup energy is required in terms of like a blackout, the resiliency involved in that. In terms of hydrogen buses and other, as another zero emission bus technology, big questions around where do you source a clean hydrogen supply is circulating. And so there's a big question on just energy supply as a big point. In addition to energy supply, going back to electric buses, what is the technology? There's specific constraints like land constraints, facility constraints, uncertainties associated with the infrastructure needs, and many things like that are outside of buying the bus, but that the infrastructure and grid support that is needed to support the operation of the bus is lacking and is uncertain. So the zero emission bus pilots also that have occurred all throughout Canada, there's sentiment that they do not capture the full picture. They provide great information on how the zero emission buses perform in the first few years, but what about the medium and long-term life? When a transit agency plans for years in advance, their operation years in advance, and starts saving up for needs in the future, how are they supposed to forecast that when they don't know what to expect in the medium and long term of the bus itself? For instance, how often will they have to change the batteries? How frequently how much more infrastructure and grid infrastructure do they need? Who's going to be taking care of that grid infrastructure? Things like that. How many? So there's a lot of questions circulating that the zero emission bus pilots so far did not capture. And they're also wondering about other low carbon technologies. Where do those technologies play next to zero emission bus technologies? If some agencies feel like they aren't equipped to handle these new emerging technologies like the zero emission buses, how about older, more low carbon technologies? Can that still come into play? And what is that technology's role? And the final point here is that all of these uncertainties are piling up. They are hiring consultants to answer these unknowns, and as well to help answer unknowns. And that has been some agencies' responses to many agencies' responses, I should say, to the uncertainties and how they're piling up. Some agencies have been able to find resources to hire contract internal help to become in-house experts. Those are the medium to smallish agencies. The larger agencies have more resources to hire a more dedicated team to research and support this and lead the transition. So that's the first theme. A lot to kind of consider, and that's and a lot we heard a lot from you all. So the second theme here is internal knowledge gaps. So we broke them down by small agency, medium agency, and large agency, just because everyone's trying to go for the same objective here, which is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from their transit agency. And that looks like the implementation of zero emission buses. So we're all trying to get to the same place, but each agency is at a different level because of resources, either both financial and time and human resources, and a lot of other factors that kind of go into that. So in terms of motivation between all the agencies, it differs, but there's some common similarities. For smaller agencies, the motivations really have been if they have council buy-in, first of all. If they don't, they're not even thinking about zero emission buses. And there are a few agencies we spoke to that are small, and their councils just, already kind of sees the transit as it doesn't serve many people, and it's already kind of takes a backseat into what other things that they operate. That was a sentiment that was kind of expressed by some of the smaller agencies. So other smaller agencies do have more, they're motivated by federal grants. So there are mechanisms to be able to finance the upfront capital of a zero electric bus, and also just sustainability to reduce the emissions of public transit, because it is a public good and it should have a reduced impact on the public. So there's an aspect of sustainability there. So that's shared across all of them. For the medium agencies, they're also typically they're larger, they serve a larger transit ridership, they're a larger size community, and they have a council that's maybe setting targets, either replace buses by a certain year to electric, reduce greenhouse gas emissions more across transportation or across the whole city. And so that's part of the motivation. And they're also inspired by larger agencies who are doing it. So larger agencies who are more advanced in their transition to zero, in their implementation of zero emission buses, and they're kind of watching them closely on how they're doing it. There is the motivation for larger agencies are almost, we describe it as beyond motivation. They are sort of meeting their own targets. They have a plan in place. They're working towards that plan. And they're just motivated by continuing to operate their zero emission buses fleet. They've purchased many, many buses, and they are busy operating them and making sure that they are as effectively operating them as possible, because there's many, as mentioned, it's a new way of doing business, and there's many things that can be tweaked to make the operation much more optimal. So that's what they're working on, just keeping themselves going. So, because they're already kind of midway through. So now the knowledge sources between the small, medium, and large agencies also differ, but there's some commonality between them. So for the small, medium, and large, they are all kind of listening to manufacturer sales pitches. They're all looking at the Canada-wide, those like, not the Canada-wide, but the select zero emission bus pilots and the results that have come from that. And they're also having agency to agency discussions in which they're learning from each other, learning what not to do in particular, learning what they can consider doing in the future. So all agencies are doing that in some capacity. The smaller agencies are kind of just doing that from what we've discussed, kind of doing that exclusively, as they're still in the early stages, trying to figure out where should they even start if they're starting. The medium agencies, some of them that have already started and are past that initial stage, because again, medium agencies can be just starting off or not doing anything. But like the smaller agencies, not yet. But the medium agencies have also started off, are also expanding their knowledge source base, like they're looking at academic papers, they're hiring external consultants, they're looking at larger agency reports, and they're looking at these membership and these Canada-wide and provincial-wide transit associations to get information, in addition to, again, the other knowledge sources. And then the larger agencies, there is more permanent internal teams dedicated to the zero emission bus transition. So their knowledge sources really look like developing internal expertise to be able to fuel and sustain the transition, because that's what's required, of strong knowledge base within the industry to be able to carry it through, because the operation is so different than conventional diesel buses. This is also can be found in some that we talked to some medium-sized agencies, but we found it was just more common in the larger agencies. And the medium agencies, if they didn't have a team, they would have a contract of an expert, of someone to become an expert to lead the transition, or something along those lines, of just one person or a half of a day of a person. To kind of support this knowledge and this research. But what's interesting is, as mentioned, everyone is trying to go to the same, everyone's trying to go to the same objective, which is to electrify as much as possible. So everyone's learning about the same technology and how to apply it in their agency. So the next two parts of internal knowledge gaps has to do with learning methods. So kind of alluded to earlier, smaller agencies are kind of feeling left in the dark. They don't know even where to start. Some agencies haven't been exposed to anything other than zero emission vehicles for passenger cars, and they don't know much about transit at all. And they just don't know. They know there's information out there, but they just don't know where to even start learning about it, who to trust. Medium agencies are a bit more, again, if they've begun, they're a bit more advanced than the smaller agencies. Again, medium agencies, sometimes they could be at the same level of the smaller agencies, and some smaller agencies can be at the level of medium agencies, depending on where they are in their transition. But generally, like, medium agencies are soliciting agency to agency advice, and they're learning from others who learned by doing. So larger agencies have learned by doing, and they have developed their own internal expertise. And they're also working with OEMs to, with the transit manufacturers, to troubleshoot issues that they encounter in the field, and to practically make the technology more suited for their own applications. They're also acknowledging their role as a leader and knowledge, and sharing their knowledge with all the agencies who want to know. They're devising programs to help other agencies hop along and try to learn from them as much as they can, but they too understand they have their own fleet to now tend to and to continue expanding. So part of their time spent in disseminating knowledge, but they're also focused on their own expansion. Medium agencies, again, are trying to catch up and are strapped by, again, hiring consultants and internal help. So overall, those are the learning methods for all the agencies. The perception of risk is also it varies depending on how far along each agency is in their transition. So again, as mentioned, smaller agencies, just many of them haven't begun, or if they've just begun. And so the ones who haven't begun, almost unknown perception of risk, because they're missing the council buy-in. The upfront cost of the zero emission bus, prohibitive, too expensive. They're not thinking about it, so they're not too sure. Medium agencies, they're sensitive to risk, and they know enough to know that they do not know enough. Larger agencies are less sensitive, so they learn by doing on a larger scale. So larger agencies are really doing. They can make mistakes. There's more money to learn, make mistakes themselves, and then teach others not to do those mistakes. And then hopefully the other agencies pick up on those mistakes and don't replicate them. That's kind of the perception of risk along there. So finally, the third theme here is, what are the missing links to move forward? So from the transit agencies themselves, what are they saying are missing? So the transit agencies are saying that a structured coordination. So a lot of learning is done in discussions from agencies to agencies, what not to do, what to buy, what grant to look at, what report to look at, what information to check out, who to have a conversation with. A lot of this is being done organically from agency to agency. We've heard again and again that the transit agency is a wonderful sector, is a wonderful place to be because of this amount of knowledge sharing. So what is lacking, it seems that sometimes the agencies who do not know where to start may not know what agency to kind of go for and ask. So there's some structure and coordination that's lacking in the ability for the agencies to communicate. And the next point here is transit agencies and utility companies are lacking in coordination. Some agencies that the provincial utility provider and the agency are working hand in hand. Other agencies, not so much. They're not too sure. They aren't on the same page with the utilities companies. But this buy-in is critical and has been identified as a need, because electric buses are electric and buses. So if looking into that, that's what's required. For other zero emission technologies like hydrogen, that partnership with the energy supplier is critical and is lacking in some instances, and that is hindering the shift to zero emission buses. Also, as mentioned, there's this missing knowledge required for the energy specific requirements for the transition. So for electric buses, there are missing people who have a sufficient electric technologies training across the staff to be involved. They are lacking people. They're unsure where to hire from, which programs and local universities and colleges offer sufficient training to have them either help technically, help planning. So there's a lot of unknown training that is associated with the need for this transition. And then finally, transit agencies are lacking the ability and the knowledge to utilize data that they may have access to, may not yet have access to, but data that can help inform them how to most effectively analyze and operationalize the zero emission bus data. This can be there can be restrictions on the data resolution that can limit how the data is operationalized, but also there's just restrictions or uncertainties in what software to use. And as conventional, as mentioned, it's a new way of doing business. The existing softwares for diesel buses, there's many more parameters, and new software will have to be developed to be able to effectively schedule and operationalize the new zero emission buses. So the first circles around increased educational resources and programs. So the first is to create, it would be ideal to create a Canada-wide peer-to-peer education platform to sort of host a one-stop shop on information. So what grants to apply to, maybe agency-specific trustworthy knowledge, because there was again a sentiment, and who do we trust? Do we trust? It's difficult to trust the OEMs or the transit manufacturers because they're trying to sell us a project. If we go to an agency, they may have different climate and weather conditions. So how do we trust that their data we'll see the same outcome in our different climate? So sort of a one-stop shop which has this information distilled and is reliable. Another remark here is to support the development and connection with institutions that offer zero-emission bus and low-carbon technology-related education programs. So again, echoing the idea of missing this trade expertise. The schools and education programs are out there, so a connection between them and transit agencies who are going and implementing the zero-emission electric bus transition is critical. So the correct staff is on board. The next key remark here in the orange is research and development. So this looks like grants for research funding partnerships with universities, research centers, and research-oriented consultants. So this would be just an increase in the grants, and just recognizing that zero-emission buses and low-carbon zero-emission buses are still an emerging technology, and there's certain uncertainties that are that exist in the long term, and those are not yet figured out. So transit agencies, those who will be applying this technology, need to be involved in the research that's currently being done in more research-oriented spaces. And then the final point in the green here, network implementation. Not sure, but a few agencies should be across different geographies and climates and sizes, so that the information, one pilot and a few routes being replaced is very different than the full network being replaced. And there's a lot more that needs to be done when you replace a full network. So there's a lot of lessons that can be learned and a lot of mistakes that can be avoided if this sponsored full network zero-emission bus implementation is done and is publicly and openly shared to all agencies, so they can all watch, learn, kind of sit back, watch as it's done, and then replicate the process themselves. So, and follow in the footsteps of the process, but missing all the mistakes. So these are some ideas and recommendations on how we would recommend on how to progress the zero-emission bus transition based off of the interviews and the things that we've heard from the transit agencies themselves. So that wraps up this presentation, and coming soon is the next part of the knowledge series, which is knowledge series 4. And I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and I hope you have a